the first thing I'm going to do is break all the rules and pull a quote out of my pocket and read it to you. Just this past week, I had the honor of visiting the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum in Boston. And when you first walk through the museum, there's a huge wall and a mural that says, "Young Jack." And it gives a description of him. And this was a quote from that wall. He was an underachiever with a rebel streak. His shenanigans and mediocre grades exacerbated his father, who feared his son might not amount to much. Growing up, I was a good little girl. I obeyed everything that my parents, grandparents, and even extended family instructed me to do. There was a village that raised me in my hometown of Washington, D.C. There were aunts, uncles, teachers, principals that no matter where I was and everywhere I went, they reminded me of the same thing. Go to school, get good grades, respect your elders, don't talk back, be nice, don't steal. You're such a good little girl. Now, there were others around me that I observed that weren't good at all, at least in my mind. I thought they were bad. Now, there was no one around to actually tell me, these are the things that will make you bad. I was no fool. I quickly realized when my cousins and friends and neighbors were being bad because they got a whooping or a spanking, some other people called it. I didn't like whoopings, spankings, or anything else that would limit my freedom, so I remained a good little girl. Now, in the larger community, there were still teachers and parents and neighbors, friends and cousins and aunts and uncles. And to these bad little kids, they would say things like, "Don't wear shoes outside the house." And what would those kids do? They just wouldn't wear shoes at all. Instead of wearing shoes, they decided, I just won't put any shoes on at all. I'm going to run outside, out the door, with no shoes on, come back in, instead of pausing and wasting time to put shoes back on. I just won't wear shoes at all. Of course, they spread their dirty feet juices all throughout the house because they were just bad. When the teacher said, "Stop talking," they kept on talking. Me, I raised my hand every single time in class. I was such a good little girl. They didn't like rules at all. They had all kinds of reasons for the rules they didn't follow and all kinds of reasons for the rules they were gonna follow for the same daggone thing. They were just bad. Me, I was a good little girl. When we would go to the playground, they would climb all the way to the top of the monkey bars and then jump. Me, still standing on the ground, looking up at them, "Don't jump! Please don't jump! Just climb back down. You don't have to jump. Please, please." They didn't listen. They jumped anyway because they were bad. When recess ended and it was time for us to go back into school, they would start running, just as the bell was ringing, pushing any and everybody out of the way, instead of like me walking into school before the bell ring, right at the bell ring to get there on time. I was a good little girl. So again, teachers and family were constantly telling me to be a good little girl. And all these kids around me were just bad. The funny thing about my observations of all these bad kids and all of my realization that I didn't want to be one was that my mother nicknamed me Troubles. She called me Troubles because I limited her freedom. When she would leave me with a babysitter, grandparents, friends, and family, I would just cry and scream and yell, "Where's my mama?" Because I was limiting her freedom and she had to come back and take me everywhere she went. The good thing is, Troubles eventually grew up and realized and made an observation about all those bad kids that she didn't realize when she was young, that they did something that this good little girl rarely ever did: took risk. Now, as I talk to business owners, and I've worked in government for so many years, and I've worked under many leaders, and I've been a leader myself, the one thing that I have lived in a world of, that I rarely ever did, was people who took risk. And the one thing I know about business owners, the number one muscle that they exercise all the time, every day, no matter what, is taking a risk. The US Census does an annual business survey of all businesses, and one stat that consistently remains the same. New business starts in the first year, 20% of them are going to close. Come the third year, 10% are going to close in that first year. Come that third year, 20% are going to close. When you look at that fifth year of those new business starts, over half of them have closed. But at the end of the day, regardless of how grim those stats may seem or how great they may seem, in the midst of that is a business owner that took a risk. Now, in my opinion, the one area where any leader, whether in business, government, or nonprofit, should not ever take a risk is who to put in charge. Because from what I've seen and what I've experienced, there's still a lot of bad kids running around. They're now adults, and they're just happy to be in charge. I'm the boss. I have all the answers. I get to make all the decisions. Now's my time to prove that I'm not bad after all. And check this out. This is the worst one, I think. Now's my chance to tell everybody else what to do. Those were those bad kids that sometimes when we were young, the teachers were put in charge of the classroom, and we all knew they were bad, but the teachers had no clue. Because those were the bad kids that would hide the fact that they were manipulative, liars, cunning, knocking out the little girls in the playground and tripping up the little boys, mean girls, nasty little boys, just bullies. So again, when it comes to who to put in charge, I would encourage you to peel back the layers and consider two different types of leaders that you would want to put in charge. And hopefully it's not a bad kid, but maybe when I'm done, you realize you do want a bad one. So when we talk about the word bad, I grew up in the 70s watching a myriad of wonderful movies that are now called Black exploitation films. My favorite were those that had Foxy Brown in them. And that in that 2-hour time span, the word that you would hear more than any other word, probably 1,000 times in that 2-hour period was the word bad. But it wasn't just bad, it was bad. And in that time period in the 70s, Black folks took that word bad and turned it into something good. And it wasn't just good, bad. Meant really, really good, right? And so when you see something, whether it was in the movie or even still today, whether it was an outfit, a pair of shoes, some food, but most importantly, your afro, if it was bad, it was really, really good. There was even a really good song back then called She's a Bad Mama Jamma, just as fine as she can be. She wasn't bad, she was bad. And I think we all remember that hit from the 80s with Michael Jackson. She's bad. I can't get as high as Michael, but we know the song, right? So consider, again, I want you to consider two types of leaders that you may put in charge of your organization, whether you're in business, whether you're in government, or a leader of a nonprofit. There are actually three types, but not for this TED Talk. I'm not going to deal with the third, but I'll mention the third one towards the end. So the first one I want you to consider avoiding are what we call, or what I've come up with, are tripper-uppers. And the second one I want you to consider, to look into, are what we call line steppers. So these first ones, tripper-uppers. These again are those bad kids that, in my opinion, grew up and stayed bad. Either their parents didn't have the resources to capture exactly what was going on, peeling behind the layers, to deal with this bad child, or they currently don't have the resources themselves or even the willingness to figure out, do I have some unhealed wounds here from childhood, from being a bad kid that I need to work on? And they're still bad today. Many times they're going to trip themselves up or trip up your business. Again, these are the ones who love to be in charge. I still say, to this day, many of those were the mean girls, nasty little boys, and still are bullies to this day. Many of them appoint themselves hall monitors for the rest of their coworkers. Many of them still sabotage work environments and places and spaces where they go. You don't want a tripper-upper in your business. Because again, they're going to trip your business up after they trip themselves up too. And hopefully it won't take you too long to discover them. Second group of bad kids I want you to consider are the line steppers. These are those bad kids who, when you really look at them on the surface, you're like, oh, they're so bad. And then when you take a step back and peel back the layers, you go, These are the kids who, again, ran outside with no shoes on, right? But they did it in full sight of the adults. They weren't hiding. We just weren't going to wear any shoes as the bad kids. When their parents said make up the bed, they just pulled back the sheets, pulled back the covers, and pretended it was made up, knowing that nothing was really made up at all. They were constantly testing the boundaries, constantly seeing where the lines were, constantly figuring out, where can I step over this line? You also may call them water testers, always testing the waters. But if you ever watch Dave Chappelle, when Eddie Murphy's now deceased brother, Charlie Murphy, was on there, he did a great episode and he was talking about habitual line steppers. So this second group, water testers, or you can call them habitual line steppers, I think these are some leaders that you might really want to consider adding to your business. I want to give you a couple examples of some habitual line steppers that have been in my life. The first one I'll mention is my brother, Eugene. Now, that's for another TED Talk. When my brother was young, he was uber smart, uber intelligent. As a matter of fact, I remember coming home one day. I was 13 years old. He was 10 years younger than still is 10 years younger than I am. And I come home and I see my 10-speed bike with every single part all in the living room. I love my bike. And I said, Ma, Kai, well, his nickname was Kai, but his name is Eugene. Kai took apart my bike. I'm 13. He's 3. My mother was calm and cool. Now, I had already decided that he was a bad little boy because, of course, he was my little brother, right? Many of the adults had already decided he was a bad little boy. Why? Because he constantly questioned them. He had lots of questions. He was always exploring, always trying to figure out what was happening. And you know you're not supposed to talk back to adults, right? So he had taken apart my entire bike. My mother, who's normally not the calmest person in the world, was calm, cool, and collected. She said, oh, he's going to put it back together. I said, he's 3. How is he going to put my bike back together? Well, he ultimately did. So that's another TED Talk when we talk about those bad kids that take apart things and know how to put it together. But because of the environment they're in, they make some bad choices, they can be reformed. But the two I really want to focus on, again, going back to the water testers, the habitual line steppers, again, are those that you want to seek out. And the tripper-uppers are those that you want to avoid. So let me go back to another example of a habitual line stepper in my life was my summer intern, David. David is smart, articulate, savvy, sought me out for a summer internship. I didn't go looking for him. He's in his last year of college. Instead of doing 4 years, he's going to finish it in 5 and walk out with his master's, constantly thinking, constantly strategic. And when he told me he was a bad kid, I was shocked. I said, what are you talking about? Well, I had the opportunity to meet his mom. And she said, yeah, he was horrible, bad. I said, my David? This is his mom. I'm calling him my David. She said he was horrible. She said he was so bad, she had to call her mother, her aunts, her cousins, her second cousins, her third cousins, her grandmother, all the women in her family, because as David said that they were from the Midwest and they all had big families. So these were women who had experience with all kinds of kids. So one day they were all at the house, I think it was a holiday, and David was being David, being bad. And his mother said all of a sudden she looked up and every single woman in the house was standing in a circle, and in the middle was David, in the floor, being David. She said, one of them looked up at her and said, we've never seen anything like it. And I'm still shocked. I'm like, this smart kid who's before me, he's polite, he's kind, what are you talking about? She then told me this other story about David being a habitual line stepper. She said eventually she was able to ask a doctor, what am I going to do with this kid? And the advice that she got was, you're going to need to get some extra help. Your insurance is not going to pay for it. You're going to have to find a specialist to help you deal with this child. So fortunately, she had the resources to do that. So she told me this story one day. The advice that she had been given was for this particular bad child, You had to give him specific instructions about the specific thing at the specific time that you wanted him to do. And you had to be specific about everything. So she told me one day she needed to go into the kitchen to wash dishes. And she wanted him to stay in the high chair in the dining room, which was not too far, but far enough, while she was washing dishes. So David's about 3. She puts him in the high chair. She straps him in. She says, David, I need you to sit in this high chair. Do not stand up. Do not try to get out. Sit. Now, David, I'm putting this strap around your waist. He's 3 now. She's having a reason with him. I'm putting this strap around your waist, David. I need you to stay. Don't try to take it loose. Don't try to take it apart. Don't even touch it. Now, David, here's what I want you to do with your hands. I'm going to give you a toy. You can play with this toy, but don't use it to try to stand up or sit up or move. And as far as your feet, they stay right here. Just let them swing, David. Just let them swing. I don't want you to get up out of this chair. So he's situated in the dining room, she thinks. She's at the kitchen with her back to him, washing dishes. All of a sudden, she hears David screaming, yelling. Ah, ah. She's ignoring him because that was the training she had received. She already gave her instructions. He's in the chair. I'm going to ignore him. She's at the kitchen washing dishes. Gets louder. Ah! She hears David. She's ignoring him. It gets louder. I'm not going to burn your ears. She turns around, and David, still in his high chair, was right here. He had scooched the entire high chair all the way from the dining room to the kitchen. Now, if that is not an example of a water tester, a habitual line stepper, of a bad kid, I don't know what example that I could give you. So one final example I will give you is my mom, Teresa. I didn't realize till I was much older that my mother was a habitual line stepper too. Because remember, she was always telling me to be a good little girl. She gave me all the instructions on being a good little girl. So my mother, she was fiercely loyal. She was overly protective of her siblings and of me. And if you thought at any time that you were going to do any harm to her siblings or to me, she was going to fight. Physical. She was like that when she was small, and she was like that until she was in her late 50s. If you came, she was going to fight you. She was going to physically fight you. She also could cuss like a sailor. I mean, magical, lyrical, cussing out of people. But because she taught me to be a good little girl, she never taught me how to do it. So my mom died about 11 years ago, and literally on her deathbed one day, we were just talking about all kinds of things. And I said, Mom, why didn't you teach me how to cuss people out the way that you do? She looked at me and she said, girl, don't even worry about it. You know how to do it without cuss words. And my back straightened up. I said, oh, it must be bad. So what am I leaving with you today? Find a way to peel back the layers of who you decide to put in charge of your business or even government or even your nonprofit. And make sure you peel back those layers to make sure you're getting the right kind of bad. And there's nothing wrong with getting a bad mamma jamma to be a part of your business. And I also will leave you with this. Find you a good little girl like me who grew up and finally realized that taking risk is not a problem at all. Who also grew up and realized, wait a minute, every time she was with those bad kids, she was with those bad kids. I was with them all the time anyway, right? So they weren't alone out there being bad. I was with them as the good little girl. But she eventually grew up, troubles, me, grew up and realized there's nothing wrong with taking risks, that coloring outside the lines is not a crime. I've even started cussing. It's kind of fun. Not as good as my mom, but I'm trying. But most importantly, I would implore you to make sure you take that time, peel back the layers of who you decide to put in charge, and get you a bad mamma jamma. Good luck with your endeavors.